The history of life on our planet is recorded in layers of stone, but the pages are often torn and missing. For over 50 years, the story of the prehistoric skies was dominated by a single imposing name. If you've ever looked into the giants of the ancient world, you might already know the name Quetzalcoatlus northropi. When its remains were first unearthed in the Big Bend National Park of Texas in the 1970s, it didn't just break the record for the largest flying animal of all time. It fundamentally redefined what we thought biological life was capable of. Before this discovery, the understanding of aerial giants was limited. We knew of large flyers, certainly, but nothing on this scale. Quetzalcoatlus was a titan that stood 18 feet tall on the ground. To put that into perspective, that's the height of a fully grown male giraffe. For decades, this was the ultimate benchmark. Quetzalcoatlus was the evidence that nature could somehow launch a 500-pound animal into the sky. It had a wingspan estimated between 33 and 36 feet. It wasn't just a flying reptile, it was a living, breathing, full-sized aircraft, a creature of myth made manifest in the fossil record. For a long time, the scientific community was in total agreement. We had our champion. We had the limit of what physics could allow. The understanding was that if you tried to make a flying animal any larger or any heavier, the laws of gravity would simply win. The bones would be under too much stress to survive a landing, or the muscles would never find the torque required to catapult that much mass into the air. But history is rarely a finished book. It's a series of chapters, many of which are still buried under thousands of tons of rock and soil. While the world was looking at the deserts of North America for the ultimate giant, something much darker, much heavier, and far more imposing was waiting to be discovered halfway across the globe. We were so distracted by the height and the elegance of the feathered serpent that we didn't think to ask if nature had produced something less like a glider and more like a tank. We assumed the record was set in stone. We assumed that 36 feet was the end of the line. But deep in the heart of what is now Romania, in a region known as the Hatzegopteryx Basin, the Earth began to give up secrets that were not expected. Archaeologists weren't just looking for another flyer, they were looking for a creature that shouldn't have been able to exist. The king of the American deserts was about to meet the nightmare of Transylvania. The discovery wouldn't just add a few inches to a wingspan, it would reveal a predator built with a level of brutality that the air had never seen before. To understand how a creature this massive could exist, we have to look at the sheer physics of the impossible. If you look at the birds in the world today, they operate on a very specific set of rules. They're light, they're fragile, and they rely on a two-legged launch to get off the ground. But when you're dealing with an animal that weighs as much as a high-performance motorcycle, the rules of birds no longer apply. If a 500-pound reptile tried to hop into the air using only its back legs, the force of the jump would likely shatter its own skeleton. Gravity is unforgiving, and at this size, it's a constant enemy. For years, this led to a massive debate in the world of history and science. How could something the size of a giraffe actually fly? Some argued they were just gliders, leaping off cliffs and hoping for a thermal wind to catch them. Others suggested they weren't much more than oversized scavengers that stayed grounded. But then the understanding of quadrupedal launch changed everything. These titans were not birds, they were biological catapults. They would lean forward, load the tension into their chest and wing muscles, and then explode upward in a single, violent motion. This allowed them to clear the ground in seconds, transitioning from a heavy, earthbound walker to a master of the skies. However, even with this specialized launch, there is a limit. Every biological structure has a breaking point where the weight of the animal becomes too much for the wings to support. The bones of most pterosaurs are marvels of engineering. Hollow, air-filled, and paper-thin to keep the weight down. This is why Quetzalcoatlus was thought to be the final limit. It was built for efficiency, It was a long-distance traveler designed to soar over the vast Cretaceous plains with minimal effort. But the discovery in Romania challenged the very foundation of this logic. The bones found there were not paper-thin. They were thick, reinforced, and built to withstand incredible amounts of stress and torque. This was a creature that seemed to ignore the weight limit of the sky. It wasn't just built to fly, it was built to sustain the kind of physical impact that would have snapped the bones of any other aerial animal. This is where the mystery deepens. Why would nature design a flyer that was so heavily armored? Why trade the safety of a lightweight, efficient body for something that required so much raw power to stay airborne? To find the answer, we have to look at what happens when a flyer stops being a scavenger and starts being a top predator. We have to look at an animal that was designed to collide with its prey at high speeds and walk away without a scratch. Before we descend into the mystery of the Romanian giant, we have to look at the world it inhabited. The skies were not a quiet place. They were a lethal, crowded battlefield occupied by an armada of diverse predators. Each species was a specialist, evolved to dominate a specific niche in the food chain. To understand the king, you had to understand the competition it faced and why it had to become so much more than a simple flyer. First, consider the pteranodon. This is the creature most people recognize, but the reality was far more impressive than movies suggest. With a 20-foot wingspan and a head topped with a long, bony crest, they were the high-speed scouts of the ocean. They didn't just drift, they patrolled the coastlines with terrifying efficiency. They were capable of dive-bombing the surf at 30 miles per hour, hitting the water with enough force to impale fish deep below the surface. They were the masters of the open sea, built for speed and endurance. Then you have the outliers, the creatures that look like they belong in a world of science fiction. Nyctosaurus is perhaps the most alien of them all. It possessed a massive L-shaped head crest that stood nearly 3 feet tall, dwarfing the rest of its body. Archaeologists have debated for years whether this was used as a biological rudder, a sail to catch the wind, or a vibrant display to ward off rivals. Whatever its purpose, it proves that nature was experimenting with radical designs to squeeze every bit of performance out of the air. As we move inland, the designs become even more specialized. Alanka was a creature that preferred the marshlands and forests. While it was a capable flyer with a 10-foot wingspan, it spent a significant amount of its time on the ground. It was like a stalker, walking on 4 legs like a giant leathery stalk. It utilized a long, heron-like beak to hunt through the reeds, looking for anything small enough to swallow. It didn't hunt fish in the ocean, it hunted baby dinosaurs in the shadows. Finally, there was Tupandactylus, the showman of the skies. Its head was dominated by a massive, colorful crest that likely served as a warning to anything that dared to cross its path. In the prehistoric world, being that visible was a luxury only afforded to the most dangerous or the most successful. All of these creatures were marvels of evolution. They had conquered the air, the sea, and the shoreline. But as impressive as they were all operating under the same set of constraints. They were relatively light, they were specialized, and they generally avoided direct physical confrontation with large prey. They were predators, yes, but they weren't top apex predators that could get into a fight and win. But that all changed on a small, isolated island where the rules of the world were about to be broken by a flyer that decided the air was no longer enough. To understand why the rules of nature were rewritten, we have to examine the specific conditions of the prehistoric island that made this monster possible. 66 million years ago, the map of the world looked nothing like it does today. Europe was not a solid landmass, it was a scattered chain of tropical islands. One of these islands, located in what is now modern-day Romania, was a place called Hatzeg. This was not just a piece of land, it was an evolutionary pressure cooker. It was a place where the standard laws of biology were discarded in favor of things much more strange. In the rest of the world, it was the era of giants. This was the time when long-necked dinosaurs, the sauropods, grew to the size of multi-story buildings. But on an island, space is a luxury, and food is a finite resource. When a population of massive animals becomes trapped on an island over millions of years, nature is forced to innovate. The result is a phenomenon known as insular dwarfism. Imagine a world where giants began to shrink. The massive, long-necked dinosaurs that should have been 80 feet long were forced to adapt to the limited vegetation of Hatzeg. Over generations they became smaller and smaller, until they were no larger than a modern pony. These were the Magurosaurus, fully grown, mature, long necks that could walk under the belly of their mainland cousins without bowing their heads. On this island, the Titans had become miniatures. But this shrinking process created a massive power vacuum. In the open plains of North America or Asia, the food chain was topped by massive theropods like Tyrannosaurus rex. These were the enforcers that kept the ecosystem in balance. But on Hatzeg Island, there were no giant ground predators. There were no massive carnivores to hunt the dwarf sauropods. For millions of years, the throne of the apex predator sat empty. An ecological vacuum, however, is almost always filled by an opportunistic predator. If a predator cannot evolve on the ground, it will arrive from somewhere else. The dwarf dinosaurs of Hatzeg spent their days grazing in a paradise, seemingly safe from the terrors of the mainland. They had no reason to fear the tree line, and they had no reason to look for claws in the shadows. They were the masters of their small world. But they forgot to look up. They didn't realize that while they were shrinking to fit the island, something else was growing to exploit it. While the land dwellers were getting smaller to survive the lack of food, one group of animals was getting larger, stronger, and more violent. The lack of competition on the ground invited a nightmare from the skies. The empty throne of Hatzeg Island was about to be claimed by a creature that didn't care about the rules of flight. It only cared about the abundance of an easy meal. The discovery of the true king didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a pristine skeleton lying in the dirt like a movie prop. Instead, it was a puzzle of broken fragments that initially made no sense to the people who found them. When archaeologists first began pulling remains from the Hatzeg Basin, they weren't even sure they were looking at a flyer. The bones were too robust. They were too heavy. They looked like the reinforced limbs of a ground-dwelling carnivore. In the world of prehistoric flight, bones are usually the most fragile things on Earth. To stay light enough to soar, most pterosaurs evolved bones that were paper-thin and hollow. When these animals died, their skeletons were almost always crushed flat by the weight of the Earth over millions of years. But the fragments coming out of the Romanian soil were different. These were sturdy, they were dense. They were built with internal struts that looked more like the support beams of a bridge than the wing of an animal. As more pieces were recovered, the mystery deepened. They found a jaw fragment that was absolutely massive. When they performed the measurements, the scale was staggering. They were looking at a skull that was nearly 10 feet long. To put that into perspective, that's a head larger than any king-size bed. If this creature were alive today, it could stand in your backyard and look through your second-story window without even stretching. The skeptics in the field were hesitant. They argued that perhaps these weren't the bones of a flyer at all. They thought maybe they'd found a new type of ground-dwelling dinosaur that just happened to have strange proportions. But as they found the neck vertebrae and the specific joints of the wing, the reality became unavoidable. This was a pterosaur, a huge flying reptile. But it was a pterosaur that had ignored every law of efficiency that kept Quetzalcoatlus aloft. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. We'd spent decades believing that the king of Texas was the limit of what nature could achieve, but these Romanian fossils were telling a different story. They were describing an animal that had traded the lightness of a glider for the structural integrity of a tank. It was as if nature had taken the blueprint of a flyer and decided to see how much armor and muscle it could pack into the frame before the laws of gravity finally rebelled. This wasn't just a new species, it was a new category of predator. The archaeologists realized they weren't looking at a creature that merely occupied the sky. They were looking at the animal that had filled the power vacuum of Hatzeg Island. The feathered serpent of the Americas finally had a rival, and this rival wasn't interested in soaring gracefully over the plains. It was built for a much more violent purpose. When the reconstruction was finally complete, it revealed an animal that shouldn't have been able to fly, yet it clearly did. It was named Hatzegopteryx. To understand why it dethroned the giants of the Americas, you have to look past the wingspan and focus on the sheer mass. While Quetzalcoatlus was built like a high-performance glider, Hatzegopteryx was built like a piece of heavy artillery. The most shocking feature was the neck. In most giant pterosaurs, the neck is long and relatively thin, designed to act like a crane to pick up small prey with precision. But the neck of Hatzegopteryx was a different beast entirely. It was shorter, much broader, and reinforced with a complex system of internal bone struts. These weren't just for support, they were built to absorb massive amounts of shock. This creature possessed a neck 3 times wider than its cousins in Texas. This was a neck built for combat. This anatomy tells us everything we need to know about how this animal lived. A thin neck is a liability in a fight. It can be snapped or twisted, but a reinforced neck allows for a completely different style of hunting. It meant that Hatzegopteryx could slam its 10-foot beak into heavy prey with the force of a sledgehammer. It could thrash its head side to side to dismember a target, or even engage in a ground-based struggle with a dinosaur and win. Then there is the skull. It wasn't just long, it was wide and incredibly sturdy. Most flyers have skulls that are mostly air and thin bone to keep the front end light. In the case of Hatzegopteryx, evolution prioritized heavy armor over the typical weight savings seen in other flyers. The skull evolved to be rigid and powerful, capable of delivering a bite force that would have been unthinkable for any other aerial animal. Even the wings were adapted for power over speed. They were thick, muscular, and capable of generating the massive amount of lift required to get this armored titan off the ground. When this animal stood on the earth, it didn't look like a fragile bird. It looked like a 16-foot-tall wall of muscle and leather. It was the ultimate winged tank. This anatomy was the direct answer to the environment of Hatzeg Island. In a world where the land-dwelling dinosaurs were small and vulnerable, Hatzegopteryx didn't need to be a graceful glider. It didn't need to travel thousands of miles across the ocean. It needed to be the ultimate executioner. It was nature's way of proving that if you give a predator enough time and enough food, it will eventually break every rule of physics to stay at the top of the food chain. To see Hatzegopteryx in action is to see a nightmare come to life. On most of the planet, the sky was a place of escape for smaller animals. But on this island, the sky was the source of the ultimate threat. Imagine standing in a clearing, the sun warm on your back, and the only sound is the gentle rustle of the wind. Then the lights begin to fade. Not because a cloud has covered the sun, but because something has entered the airspace directly above you. The dwarf sauropods didn't look up until it was too late. Hatzegopteryx didn't swoop in like a hawk. It dropped like a stone, with a terrifying leather snapping sound. It flared its massive wings at the last second and slammed into the earth. The ground didn't just vibrate, it shuddered under the weight of 500 pounds of muscle and bone. This was the moment the transition happened. The flyer disappeared, and in its place stood a 16-foot-tall ground stalker. It folded its wings into massive, stilt-like walking limbs, towering over a panicked herd of small dinosaurs. It didn't move with the clumsy hop of a bird. Every step was a display of raw power as it stalked across the clearing with its focused, relentless momentum of an apex predator. It singles out a target, a young, pony-sized longneck that's struggling to find cover. Then comes the strike. Because of that reinforced, iron-clad neck, it doesn't need to be careful. It launches its 10-foot skull forward with the speed of a piston. The beak doesn't just bite, it impales. The force of the impact is enough to snap bone and collapse lungs instantly, but it doesn't stop there. Using those massive neck muscles, it thrashes its prey side to side, utilizing its sheer mass to overwhelm any struggle. Within seconds, the struggle is over. The winged tank stands over its kill, letting out a low-frequency guttural roar that vibrates through the very soil of the island. It is the undisputed king of a world that shouldn't have existed. It proved that the air could produce a predator just as terrifying as anything that ever walked the land. We've spent decades believing that Quetzalcoatlus was the limit of prehistoric flight. We were satisfied with the record. But Hatzegopteryx tells us that we've only scratched the surface of what's buried in the earth, and many more secrets are just waiting to be uncovered. While the evolution of flight reached its peak with this aerial titan, the land was home to creatures that pushed the physical limits of biology even further. Argentinosaurus is a massive herbivorous dinosaur that lived during the late Cretaceous period, approximately 90 million years ago, in what is now Argentina. It's known for being one of the largest land animals that ever lived on the planet, with estimates suggesting it may have reached lengths of up to 100 feet and weighed up to 100 tons. Its long neck made up around half its total body length, and it had a relatively small head, with a brain the size of a baseball. The bones of Argentinosaurus are some of the largest ever discovered, with thigh bones measuring over 6 feet long. It was so big that it likely had to eat vast amounts of vegetation just to sustain itself, and it had to eat up to half a ton of food each day. It probably faced very few predators due to its sheer size and strength. But Argentinosaurus was not the only big dinosaur roaming the planet. Spinosaurus is a genus of theropod dinosaur that also lived during the late Cretaceous period, around 100 to 95 million years ago. It's known for its distinctive sail-like structure on its back, which is formed by elongated spines of vertebrae. The first fossils of Spinosaurus were discovered in Egypt in the early 20th century, but they were destroyed during World War II. However, new fossils have been discovered in recent years, providing more information about this unique and intimidating dinosaur. It turns out that Spinosaurus didn't just hunt on land and is believed to have been a semi-aquatic dinosaur and spent a significant amount of time in and around water. Its adaptations for swimming included its long, narrow snout, which may have been used for catching fish, and its webbed feet were able to propel the big, scary, sharp-toothed beast through water with ease. However, the jury is still out on just how fast a swimmer Spinosaurus was, and whether it spent all or just some of its time in water. Spinosaurus was one of the largest known carnivorous dinosaurs, with some estimates putting it at over 15 meters in length and weighed 8 metric tons. It's probably safe to say that this dinosaur was scary at any size and speed. But dinosaurs weren't the only huge animals to live on Earth. Shastasaurus is a prehistoric marine reptile that lived during the late Triassic period, around 210 to 215 million years ago. It's considered one of the largest known marine reptiles to exist on the planet, with some Shastasaurus reaching lengths of up to 20 meters long. Its size is comparable to that of a modern blue whale, making it one of the largest creatures to have ever lived in the oceans. Shastasaurus was a highly adapted swimmer. Its elongated body and paddle-like limbs suggest that it was capable of sustained, efficient swimming. Its big, oddly shaped tail was likely used for propulsion, similar to that of a modern dolphin. Shastasaurus was a carnivore that probably fed on other marine reptiles and large fish. Its elongated snout, filled with sharp teeth, suggests it was a specialized predator. But there were other specialized predators that would take its place millions of years later, lurking in the deep, always hunting and looking for its next meal. The infamous megalodon, also known as the megatooth shark, is one of the most well-known prehistoric sharks that ever lived. This huge shark lived during the Miocene and Pliocene epochs approximately 23 to 3.6 million years ago, and was one of the largest predators to ever swim the oceans. The size of Megalodon is the most impressive feature of this species. The largest specimens of Megalodon found may have reached lengths of around 18 meters long and weighed up to 60 tons. To put this into perspective, the largest known great white shark, which is a close relative of Megalodon, only reaches a maximum length of around 6 meters and a weight of just 2.5 tons. One of the reasons for the massive size of Megalodon was its diet. Scientists believe that these sharks fed on a variety of large marine mammals, including whales. The bite force of Megalodon was estimated to be between 10 and 18 tons of pressure, which is more than 10 times the bite force of the largest recorded great white shark. This allowed Megalodon to easily bite through the thick blubber of its prey. But despite its impressive size and strength, Megalodon went extinct around 3.6 million years ago. However, the exact cause of its extinction is still debated to this day. Some theories suggest that the extinction of the Megalodon was due to a decline in the availability of its prey or competition with other predators. It's possible that one of the creatures that likely took over as the ocean's top predator might have been a giant known as Leviathan. This huge prehistoric whale lived approximately 12 to 13 million years ago during the Miocene epoch. It was one of the largest predatory whales to have ever existed, with estimates suggesting it could also grow up to 17 to 18 meters in length and weighed up to 50 to 60 tons. Leviathan had large, robust jaws with teeth that could grow up to 36 centimeters in length, making them some of the largest teeth of any known carnivorous animal. These teeth were blade-like and serrated, which would have been well suited for tearing into the flesh of prey. Based on the structure of its teeth, it's believed that Leviathan primarily preyed on large marine animals such as whales, seals, and other dolphins. Given their size and predatory nature, it's possible that Leviathan could have attacked and even killed and eaten a Megalodon. However, it's important to note that there's no direct evidence of such an interaction, as both species lived millions of years apart and in different marine environments. When it comes to huge land animals, not many are aware of this next one. Paraceratherium would have been an intimidating animal to be around, regardless if it was a herbivore or not. They were hornless, rhinoceros-like mammals that lived during the Oligocene epoch, approximately 34 to 23 million years ago. It's definitely one of the largest land animals that's ever lived, with an estimated weight of up to 18 metric tons, almost as much as 3 or 4 adult African elephants, and a height of over 5.5 meters at the shoulder. Paraceratherium had a long, flexible neck and a small head in proportion to its massive body. It's believed to have been a herbivore, feeding on leaves and other vegetation. It had 4 large legs, each with 3 toes, which were adapted for supporting its weight and allowing it to move across vast areas. But this wasn't the only giant land animal running around on the planet. There were 3 other giant animals roaming the land of North America around 23 to 20 million years ago. Daeodon was one of the largest entelodonts, a group of pig-like mammals that roamed North America and Eurasia during the Oligocene and Miocene epochs. It stood over 2 meters tall at the shoulder and weighed up to 498 kilograms. Daeodon was an omnivore that ate almost anything it could catch or scavenge, including small mammals, reptiles, birds, and carrion. It had a powerful bite force and sharp teeth that could crush bones. But the pteropig Daeodon went extinct during the late Miocene, around 5 million years ago, possibly due to competition with other carnivores or climate change. Aside from the mammals, there were giant reptiles creeping around that you probably wouldn't want to meet, like this next monster. Megalania, also known as the giant ripper lizard, was a prehistoric predator that lived in Australia during the Pleistocene epoch. It was a massive lizard that's estimated to have grown up to 6 meters long and weighed up to 680 kilograms, making it one of the largest lizards to have ever existed. One of the most interesting things about Megalania is that it was able to climb trees. This is surprising, given its large size and heavy body, but it's believed that Megalania used its strong claws to climb up trees to search for prey or escape from predators. Another interesting thing is that Megalania went extinct around 50,000 years ago. This means that it's very possible humans were either hunted or the hunters of Megalania. So far, we've covered a few of the biggest animals that are now extinct. But what are the largest animals on the planet today? If you answered whales, then you'd be correct, and you'd get a shiny gold star. When it comes to toothed whales, sperm whales are the largest and can grow up to 18 meters in length and weigh over 60 tons. Sperm whales are known for their remarkable ability to dive to incredible depths of up to 3,000 meters and stay underwater for over an hour, making them one of the deepest diving mammals in the world. Sperm whales are apex predators and feed primarily on squid, but also eat fish and other marine animals. They're also known for their ability to use echolocation to locate prey in the deep ocean. Now, that seems huge, but there is one animal that's much, much bigger, and its immense size and impressive abilities will simply blow your mind. Blue whales are the largest animals to have ever lived on Earth. They can grow up to 30.5 meters in length and weigh up to 200 tons, making them even much larger than any dinosaur that ever lived. Blue whales have a heart the size of a small car, weighing as much as 680 kilograms. A blue whale's heart only beats 5 to 6 times per minute, but pumps over 10,000 liters of blood with each beat. Their blue-grey skin pattern is actually made up of millions of tiny organisms called diatoms. And here's something else remarkable we bet you didn't know. Blue whales produce some of the loudest sounds in the animal kingdom, with their calls reaching up to 188 decibels. That's louder than a jet engine. They also have a lifespan of about 80 to 90 years, putting them right up there with humans as the longest living mammals on Earth. Sadly, despite being the largest animal on the planet, blue whales are also one of the most endangered species, with only around 10,000 individuals remaining in the wild. And that's a wrap on the largest animals video. We hope you enjoyed learning about these incredible creatures and their impressive sizes. If you found this video informative and entertaining, let us know with a thumbs up. And stay tuned here by subscribing to our channel for more fascinating content about planet Earth, the universe, and everything out there in the cosmos. Thank you for watching.